So we finally got a new Mortal Kombat 1 balance patch, and overall I'd say it's pretty good. And today we're just going to go over all of the changes and what they mean for each character. So first and foremost, Geras. Geras got some pretty nice buffs this patch. The first buff, which is pretty major, is that his inevitable down back 3 when you have 3 charges of Hourglass, the finger snap. It is only 21 frames now, so a lot faster than 26 frames. And basically what this means for you is that you can catch people out a lot more easily now. It's a lot less reactable as well, so if someone is just walking back and forth at full screen or trying to catch you out at mid-screen and they're not blocking, there's a lot less time for them to react and just block, and now you've wasted 3 charges of Hourglass. You're a lot more likely to catch people out who are shooting projectiles, walking, pressing buttons, doing whatever, jumping. So just a great buff for inevitable. Now it's a lot more threatening. His next buff is actually for his sweep. So as we all know, Geras doesn't have a terribly great neutral game. He doesn't have very good buttons. At least I would say so. His overhead is not super good. But the main button that a lot of Geras players like is his sweep. And for good reason. It's got great range, it's safe, and it gets you the plus frames that you want. Now the buff to it is that it recovers 2 frames quicker. Which to most is like, oh, that doesn't mean much, but I mean, honestly, recovering 2 frames faster, especially if you whiff just shy of your opponent, can mean the difference of your opponent dashing up and getting you with a full combo. And if they were to mess up dashing up, now you're more likely to actually block whatever they throw at you to try and whiff punish you. So obviously it's not a super huge buff, and I would like to see more buffs to his buttons, honestly. His next buff is actually for his Sandstorm, which is down forward 4. So what they did for this is that they've adjusted the hit regions on it, so it's more likely that you'll actually send your opponent towards you compared to sending them away. This is just a great buff for Geras because it's more likely you'll actually send people towards you. You're a lot more likely to actually get a pickup off this compared to the usual, which is probably a lot of frustration. And for his final buff, they've actually increased the max range of his teleport from his Fatal Blow. So Fatal Blow is just a lot more likely to actually catch people out now, especially if they're playing Runaway. They're just backdashing, especially if you're playing like against Omni-Man, the king of Runaway in this game. You're a lot more likely to actually catch them out at full screen and further with his Fatal Blow. So again, making something of his a lot more threatening, much like down back 3. So overall, great buffs for Geras. But now we're going to move on to the opposite end of good buffs, and we're going to talk about Havik. So Havik. Havik's buffs are not substantial enough for this character. Now Geras' buffs were definitely a step in the right direction for the character's kit and his overall gameplay. Havik's buffs were not really a step in the right direction. He's still playing the same game. Obviously Geras is too, right? But Geras got more threatening. Havik is just the same old strike throw, I'm gonna down 4. I'm gonna either throw you or I'm gonna down 1 you. I have all the plus frames in the world, but I can't do anything with the character that he is. So first and foremost, stand 4 recovers 1 frame quicker. Which, honestly, is not so bad, right? 26 frames of recovery compared to 27. But here's the problem, it's a stand 4. Right, so it hits high, and you do get nice block advantage from it, but all your opponent has to do is just crouch down. If they crouch down, it's like, well, and they don't hold block, you are still getting punished for this. It doesn't matter if the recovery is 27 frames or 26 frames, this is still getting punished. His stand 3 is only 13 frames now, which is pretty good, down from 15 frames, so a 2 frame speed boost to this. And honestly, I don't really have any gripes with that. It is like a pretty decent enough, at least, when I used to play Havik. It always worked out for me as an anti-air, especially if the angle was kind of steep. So this being a little quicker will let you anti-air people a lot more easily. Again, it's going to be a better tool to punish people as well. But again, like I said, it's not super good for Havik, right? And again, It's a kick. It's a raw kick. It's a high. People can duck it. And if they low profile from the end of their move or during their recovery frames, you're not hitting them with this. So for his third and final buff, they chose to buff forward 1-3. Now forward 1-3 used to have a recovery of, I believe, 55 frames, so it's down by 15 frames, being only at 40, but that really doesn't change Havik that much, and I've never seen a single Havik player use forward 1-3. I don't think I used it that much when I used to play Havik, because forward 1-2-1, or forward 1-2-2, excuse me, is just the better option. I don't see why you would want to do the high-low option. It's just not that great, in my opinion. And the secondary buff to it is that there's, well, I guess it's not really a buff, more of a nerf slightly, is that there's 10 less frames of block stun on it. So it's still safe on block, right? It's just that your opponent has more time, or has less time in recovery if they block it. So bit of a buff, bit of a nerf, I believe. But again, no one really uses this. You can get a pickup off it, depending on your Kameo, but I barely ever see it on Havik. And like I said, these buffs are just not... This doesn't change Havik. This doesn't change him at all. He's still playing MK11, basically. He's still playing nothing but, I'm a stagger forward 1, and I'm going to throw you, or I'm going to stagger some other string, and I'm going to do a down 1, or a down 4. That's it. So really, these buffs don't change Havik at all. I wouldn't really call them buffs. They're just not substantial enough. So Havik buffs, I don't think they're good. It's just, I don't know if they know what to do with Havik, honestly. He's weird. But I'll leave it at that. Havik still has it pretty rough. And now we're on to one of the first major changes in this patch, which is Johnny Cage. He's been hit with a ton of nerfs. And I'll tell you my thoughts on these nerfs on Johnny Cage and Peacemaker at the end of this video if you want to hear them. But let's just go through what the changes are. So the first nerf to Johnny Cage is that down back 1, which is his parry, is now supposed to be 8 frames, which is up from 6 frames. So there's less chances of you actually, using it. So here's the thing, right? The patch notes said it's 8 frames, up from 6 frames, but as you can see there, it says it's 9 frames, but it's 9 frames in game, which is slightly off from what the patch notes said, but I digress. So basically what that means is that there's more of a chance for your opponent to actually interrupt you before you actually get the parry active, which is a pretty big nerf to Johnny Cage's parry. And a pretty huge nerf to the parry, or to the enhanced parry, is that now it has a 4-frame startup. Well, again, says 5 in game, says 4 in the patch notes. So this is huge, and the reason why it's huge is because now people can actually meaty Johnny Cage. People don't have to respect the parry anymore. Now, obviously that takes a lot of timing. People are going to have to practice that, especially if a Johnny Cage does like delay wake up. He could still possibly wake up and parry, but now there's actually a chance to meaty this guy on wake up instead of him having, a parry option on wake up and having a shadow kick wake up option. So, huge nerf. And on top of that, both parries, even though it still says it in the special move list that you can extend them, you cannot extend these anymore. They're only active for 37 frames each. You can no longer extend that. And on top of that, the recovery frames have been upped by 15, so you have 30 frames of recovery on both versions, whether you enhance them or not. So huge nerf to the parry. And now for his final nerf, his final change, Shadow Kick is no longer an 8-frame special. It is now 10 frames. So that is massive. This move, this special that went basically nearly full screen, close to it, was only 1 frame slower than a jab and was as fast as Quan Chi's standing jab. Now, it's a lot slower, 2 frames slower, which again is huge because it also means you have more of a chance to armor break Johnny Cage on wake up compared to before where it was basically impossible to break his armor on wake up. And the other nerf to it is that it has plus 2 frames of recovery. So it went from 26 to 28 frames of recovery on whiff. So pretty big nerfs for Johnny Cage. So do these changes drop Johnny Cage to like the worst character in the game or make him more in line to the other characters? I don't think so. But hey, they are nerfing him, which is what a lot of people want, especially after Final Combat. So Kitana got one buff, and that's that square wave, which is down back 2. Has less damage scaling in the middle of a combo. So I don't play Kitana. I don't know the numbers. You guys can let me know in the comments if this is, a huge buff for her, or it just means nothing to her. But either way, a buff is a buff, and you'll get more damage in your combos now, which is quite nice at least, even if it's not super game changing. So moving on to Li Mei, she got some pretty alright buffs, I'd say. First and foremost, 4-3-1-2, which is called Pancration Champion. The first hit of this string is now only 16 frames of startup, which is really good because what it does is it ups her whiff punish game. And if you didn't know, the original startup was 19 frames. So a pretty good buff on her whiff punish game, which I'm sure is pretty nice for you Li Mei players out there. Now it's a lot more consistent to whiff punish people with this string. So a pretty significant change to Li Mei is that now her Sky Lanterns actually hit mid whenever you blow them up manually with your back forward 1. So before people could just duck under them, people didn't have to respect them, but now people actually have to respect them. So that just gives Li Mei pressure with the lanterns, more pressure than she already has with them anti-airing people. And now they're just a lot more deadly, and it's an actual hazard that people have to be aware of compared to before. It's just, oh well, duck under them, who cares? And for her final buff, I don't really know if this is gonna be game changing for you Li Mei players. You let me know, but forward 3, which is her overhead, it is now active for 7 frames, which is 3 frames longer than before. It used to be active for only 4 frames. And it recovers just a little bit quicker. So it went down from 45 to 38. So I don't know how big of a change that is for Li Mei. In my eyes, it doesn't seem that huge, but it does mean that there's more of a chance to actually catch people at the tail end of the overhead compared to before where it was only active for 4 frames. So that might be a nice change and make it a little bit more consistent. But either way, you still got some pretty decent changes, especially with the lantern stuff on Li Mei. So even if this one isn't so great, you at least got something pretty good. Obviously, more would be better. Now, Nitara got one buff, but I'd say it's pretty good. So basically before, Nitara had to commit to 1-2-1-2 to get a launcher from her jab. And of course, this launcher is unsafe and it's fully punishable by a combo, which was just really bad. But now 1-2-4, which is a safe option that ends in this kick, it's only -3 as you can see. Now this can be cancelled into a special. So you can go ahead and actually special cancel from 1-2-4, and it's very easy to confirm that as well because you get a lot of advantage from the last hit if it does land, and you can get a full combo from it. So basically, you don't need to commit to the unsafe 1-2-1-2 to launch your opponent. Now you're going to be doing less damage overall, and there's a slight nerf to 1-2-4, which is that it does 20 less damage. So instead of 110, it does 93 by itself. But that is the price for safety and a safe string that you can special cancel and get a full combo off of. So overall, I'd say that's a pretty good buff for Nitara compared to always having to commit to a 1-2-1-2 launcher, where now you can confirm from a safe string into an enhanced back forward 2, or depending on what your Kameo is, you don't need to do the enhanced version. You could get a pickup from the ending of back forward 2 regular. So just a really good buff for her. Obviously, she needs some more buffs, but it's a step in the right direction. So Reptile got some pretty good buffs as well. In fact, I believe he got the most buffs out of everyone else in this patch. So first things first, back 2. It's now safe on block, it's -4. So basically, you can just kind of pressure people with the back 2 overhead now, much like how Raiden does with his back 2, and just let it fly and you're safe, -4, which is a pretty significant buff to back 2. He now has a pretty good overhead, I would say. and you're not going to die for trying to do this quick overhead. Now it's completely safe on block, which is just really good for Reptile. Now on the topic of back 2, the halfway charge version and the full charge version are now actually plus on block. So halfway charge is safe on block, -2, and full charge is +2 on block. So that's just, again, good changes to the overhead. It's a lot scarier now, because now you can't actually punish Reptile for going for it. You have to kind of respect it a lot more. So just a great change to add a bit more danger and pressure from this back 2. His next buff is on his 2-3 and 2-4 strings. So on hit, they recover 3 frames faster. So that basically from 2-4, that means you're going to be active faster. So you have a hit advantage of 27 frames. So you can pressure on wake up. Maybe use that buffed back 2 to kind of meet you with an overhead, and you'll be safe off it. Unless, of course, your opponent goes for an armored move. And from 2-3, 3 frames faster. So having 2-3 just recover that little bit quicker can possibly lead to getting some more damage. And on top of that, both 2-3 and 2-4 have 5 more frames of block stun, which makes them a little less unsafe. Obviously, 2-3 is still -14, and 2-4 is only -5, which is completely safe to go for. So that's pretty good. Your low option still does have that 20 frame gap in there where people can armor through. And of course with 2-3 that gap is not there. So really it's just a overall great buff to one of Reptile's main strings. And his final buff is that all of his projectiles have 5 more frames of block stun, which just ups your zoning with them. Especially if your opponent isn't ducking or jumping your projectiles, you'll be able to send out a lot of projectiles pretty fast now. So just great changes to Reptile. Keep buffing him up, he needs them. Now on to Sub-Zero, he finally got some buffs, and the first one is off his forward 1-2-3 string. So forward 1-2-3 used to be unsafe. I believe it was -9, but now it's -7, which is completely safe. Obviously that gap is still there where people can armor through, but this is a great buff for Sub-Zero. He has the safe option, and pair him up with Chameleon, and this forward 1-2 is incredibly good as a mix-up tool. Now they're guessing 50-50, and your low option is safe. And just overall, your staggers are a lot better because of it. Just do forward 1-2, they're going to keep respecting that low. And if people don't want to respect the low and they go for, armor and whatnot, you got to punish off that. So his staggers are better, the full string is safe now. Just overall, great buff to Sub-Zero. 2-1 now recovers, I believe, 2 frames quicker than before. So on recovery, it's 23 frames, and on block, it's -5. And his final buff is that 2-1 also has more consistent damage scaling on grounded opponents and airborne opponents. So I don't know how huge that is for Sub-Zero. I'm assuming not that big of a difference, but maybe Sub-Zero players can let me know that it actually is a big difference. But I'm assuming it's not. So Scorpion got a slight buff in his forward 3, which is his mid. So first it recovers 1 frame quicker than before, and it can be cancelled earlier by 2 frames. So what this means for Scorpion is that 1, just forward 3 staggers are a little bit better, but mainly that forward 3-4 now, which is your mid-mid option, it's 18 frames on the second hit, which means they remove the gap. This cannot be armored through anymore. As you can see there, cannot armor through the forward 3-4. So this is obviously a great change because people can't armor through the forward 3-4, but they can still armor through forward 3-2 if they expect that you're going to go for the launcher instead of the mid-mid. So it makes him a bit more in line with other characters, and ultimately it's just a great buff to his mid because we all know his mid is not too good. So this mid string actually being safe is great. So small buff, but at least it's something. Obviously, as I've been saying with all the other characters in this video, more buffs for them, please. Now going to the opposite side of buffs, we got nerfs for Peacemaker. So first and foremost, Human Torpedo, both the enhanced version and normal version, they are now 16 frames startup. So that's a big deal, because now, much like the Johnny Cage nerf to his Shadow Kick, you can actually break his armor on this. No longer is it something where it's just guaranteed he gets to armor through whatever setup you're doing. Now you can actually break his armor, which is great. And the other nerf to it is that on miss, it has 13 more frames of recovery, making it a 58 frame recovery move. So again, another huge nerf to the human torpedo. And another change is that it no longer has the stumble animation if it's blocked, so you just get to go straight into a punish. And the punishment window is a lot bigger, as it's now minus 35 on block. Both versions of Eagly also got nerfed, so down back 4 Eagly is minus 15 now, went from minus 5 to minus 15. So doing down 1 Eagly can be punished by some characters. Obviously, this is still pretty hard to punish, but I believe every character can dash up punish it now, which is great. So Peacemaker can no longer just call Eagly, make everything safe, or, you know, guarantee everything to be safe. Now there's actually a chance to punish him. And the same goes for down forward 4, which is low Eagly. Again, minus 18, more of a window to actually punish that. Minus 20 when right next to your opponent. And as you notice with both of them, there is less pushback on the actual hit. So you're more likely to actually just dash up and punish. His next big nerf is that Force Field now has plus 30 frames of recovery, making it a 120 frame move total. So you have even more of a chance, even more of an opening to interrupt this move and punish him for going for Force Field. So that is a huge nerf to arguably one of the best anti-zoning, well, I would say the best anti-zoning tools in the game. And his final nerf, a well-warranted one, is now anti-gravity does not do 5% damage on chip, so on block. It now only does 35 damage on block, which is great because 5% for blocking that, even if you up-blocked it, was ridiculous. 35 is still not so bad, it's still not nothing, but this being only 35 damage on block is a lot healthier than it being 5%, and you could just easily chip people out with it. And that's it for the changes to the main roster characters. Now we're going to go over cameos. So Sonya got a really nice buff on her leg grab, and now it hits overhead, so there's actually 50-50 potential on it, and it's only 25 frames startup compared to its 29 frame startup, so it's more like a Stryker overhead compared to what it was before. And now it's actually +1 on block. It's actually safe compared to it being -9 on block. So just a great buff for it. Gives it better utility because it hits overhead. You're safe if you do it. Obviously there's still a gap there where if your opponent guesses correctly or if your opponent reacts to it, they can jab her out of it. But it's a lot quicker, so people actually have less time to react and jab her out of it. And now you can actually use it to do some low overhead stuff, which is quite nice. So Stryker got some nice buffs in this patch. His first buff is that Stryker bombs on a mid-air opponent actually have less gravity than they used to. Before, I guess they would apply a ton of gravity as soon as you use them on someone who's mid-air, but now you can actually probably combo with them a lot better. Even though, you know, you're not really using Stryker bombs to juggle people, you're using it for the plus frames. And his second buff is that cuffs are actually +2 on block now, which is really nice. So you can get another turn afterwards if your opponent doesn't duck them on block, or, you know, if they block them full screen and you're playing zoning, you can possibly get another fireball out. But the other thing is that now they have an increased reach. So before, these would whiff a lot, especially if your opponent was like walking forward. The handcuffs would just whiff. Now the best thing I can showcase this buff with is with Quan Chi, because before as Quan Chi, if you tried to do stand 4 into cuffs would just whiff. You couldn't combo with them. You couldn't get the plus frames that you want to set up a bone cage or a portal. But now Stryker will actually combo with the stand 4. So in cases where you have a move that pushes the opponent towards you and away from the edge of the screen, or they're just walking forward, Stryker is more likely to actually grab them and handcuff them, which just ups the usage and the utility of handcuffs so much more, because arguably this was probably the worst move that any Kameo had in the entire game. So now that this is buffed up to the point that it is, I'd say it's pretty good. And the final buff is that on whiff, it actually recovers a lot quicker. So before that would be about like 30 frames of recovery, but now it's only 22 frames of recovery, which is really nice. So just great buffs to a move that many people don't use. So now there's actually a lot more reason to use it. So Motaro got like a slight buff, slight bug fix more than anything. Basically, they adjusted the position of where you'll be teleported to if you're not facing your opponent. So if I'm not facing Sub-Zero, I'll get teleported to the same side that I wasn't facing him from. So basically it's to help with cross-ups, I guess. Or, you know, if your opponent travels across you. I don't really get this change. I don't notice a difference because I believe Motaro used to do that even before this patch. So not really a buff, not really, more of a bug fix than anything. So not super tangible, not super game-changing for Motaro. And the final buff of the entire patch is that Mavado now only takes away 50 health instead of 100. So if you're playing Quan Chi Mavado, you're not an 800 health character, you're at 850. And if you're a normal health character, you're at 950. So that's a great change for Mavado because, one, nobody really uses him. And two, it's like 100 health deficit was way too punishing for a Kameo whose entire thing is he can special cancel off of juggles at the same time that you do stuff, and that was kind of it. So that's going to do it for this patch, and as for my thoughts, I do like the patch enough to where I'll say it's a step in the right direction. I don't think the buffs were substantial enough, though, compared to what it could have been. Here's the problem with it, right? You can keep nerfing Johnny, you can keep nerfing Peacemaker, but they're still gonna be top tier. Their kits are so good, so well-rounded that there's virtually nothing you can do to them, save from completely gutting their kits, that will actually make a tangible change and make them not top 1, not top 2. Because if you keep nerfing them, eventually you're going to get to a point where they just play incredibly boring. Now, granted, I would argue they play boring already, but they're just not going to be fun to use. You can't get rid of, like, Johnny Cage's plus frames. That's his entire character. He's the plus frame, in-your-face, brawler, rushdown guy. You get rid of that, that's not even Johnny Cage anymore. So really, you do have to buff up everybody else. You have to massive steroid buff every other Kameo, every other main roster who's, like, struggling in this game. Because really, Johnny Cage and Peacemaker aren't even, like, I wouldn't argue they're, like, broken top tiers, especially in comparison to other fighting games. And that's because they are the only two characters in this game who are playing MK1. They have a full kit and they do not rely on Kameo. Every other character that's a struggle character in this game that isn't as strong as them is because they don't have a full kit and they rely on Kameo. So you would have to just round out everybody else's kits to make them on that level. And then we could actually get, like, an accurate gauge on who's really good in MK1 and who's really bad. And the main problem is that everyone else is playing MK11 or like 11.5 because every other character, what are they gonna do? Strike throw you, strike throw you, strike throw you. That's it. They have to use this one niche Kameo to work, or they have to use Chameleon because Chameleon is mega busted. And that's another problem I have with this patch. Chameleon did not get touched at all. She is more problematic than Johnny Cage and Peacemaker, because she is basically every good Kameo rolled into one. Now, I get the idea is that, oh, she's really hard because she's constantly changing her variation, but that, in fact, made her easier because you don't have to think about which variation you want. Compare that to Tremor, who's got one good variation and two mediocre ones. So the fact she didn't get any changes is pretty bad. But otherwise, like, yeah, I'm happy with the buffs. It's just like, you can nerf Johnny Cage, you can nerf Peacemaker, they're still gonna be top tier. You have to buff up the other characters in major substantial ways. Giving characters like one new move is not enough. In fact, it's like, it's not even that you change their frame data and they're magically gonna be a lot better. You have to fully, fundamentally upgrade their kits so they don't rely on Kameo, so that people can actually get creative and explore, because this game has the most potential in terms of like creative expression, but everyone is just Peacemaker Chameleon, Johnny Cage Chameleon, and that's so boring. So that's my thoughts on the patch. Definitely steps in the right direction, but man, no changes to Chameleon. They're just gonna keep nerfing, the top two characters. And if they just keep doing this, where they do tiny buffs to all the rest of the cast and just constant nerfs to Johnny Cage and Peacemaker, this game is like actually just gonna go downhill. Because those characters are gonna stop being fun to play, and the characters who are getting these tiny micro buffs are never gonna get buffed up to a point where it's actually meaningful and they can play MK1. So that's my thoughts on it. I'm curious to what you guys think. Alright, that's it. See you later.